Well, happy Monday and welcome back to In the Word. We are pressing on with our Through the Bible reading plan. Hope you stick with me on it. It's important, I think, that God's people read through God's Word, and especially during this time where Bible reading is on decline. So I pray that you continue. Today we'll be in Jeremiah chapter 52, just one chapter today. Getting kind of a hiatus, I guess. On Monday, Tuesday, we'll go through the whole book of Lamentations, which is not as intimidating as it sounds. But today we'll be looking at the end of the book of Jeremiah. And if you've been following along with us, you'll know that Jeremiah was long anticipating the destruction of Jerusalem and the exile of his people. And we come to that point now in the book, what Jeremiah was anticipating this whole time. So the chapter may seem familiar to you as you read through it today. It's repeated nearly verbatim in 2 Kings 18 through 25 and 27 through 30. I had to look at my notes here. Big sections of this chapter are repeated there verbatim. Whether or not which came first, it's hard to tell, but it's clear that Jeremiah, the book of Jeremiah, ends with where the Second Kings ends, and also Second Chronicles, with the destruction of Jerusalem, which is a significant event in the history of the country and the history of God's people. As we look at this chapter, first 11 verses have to do with the installation of this puppet king. That is, Nebuchadnezzar installs Zedekiah, expecting him to be just a vassal, basically a puppet king, and Zedekiah rebels against him. Verses 12 down to 27 are really about destruction. And then 28 through 30 are exile. And then the book ends on a note of hope, a note of anticipation. So let's just go through this quickly today. Again, Zedekiah is put on this throne at a young age, relatively young age, 21. He becomes king, and he becomes king because Nebuchadnezzar made him king. He installs him as the regent, king over Judah, southern kingdom. But Zedekiah quickly rebels. He's a dishonest, evil king. He quickly rebels against Nebuchadnezzar, and this brings down upon them the ultimate destruction of 586. So as we've discussed before, there were 3 attacks and exiles on Jerusalem, one in 597. One in 605, one in 597, and then the last in this one is 586. So this is Jerusalem, the city, as well as Judah, has been a thorn in the flesh, if we can use that term, of the king of Babylon. It's been a source of rebellion against him. So in 597, he's fed up. He comes and destroys. He puts a king on the throne. The king rebels. That's enough. It's the straw that broke the camel's back. So Nebuchadnezzar comes down with the full force of his army. And we see that what happened to the king in these first 11 verses. The last thing that Zedekiah sees is his own sons being put to death. And then he himself is blinded. So it's kind of a cruel judgment, cruel judgment that he endures here, that according to Nebuchadnezzar's command, the last thing he would see was his own sons being put to death, and then he is blinded, his eyes are put out. Starting in verse 12 then, we see that sometime after the defeat of Judah, the temple is destroyed, and that's the discussion from 12 down to 16. So this is the temple that Solomon had originally built back in 1 Kings that you read through, and expanded and improved upon during Solomon's reign, and ultimately this is the temple that's destroyed, that's flattened. And then in verses 17 through 23, we see the temple furnishings. Now there were extensive furnishings there of gold and silver, bronze that were taken captive into Babylon. I'm losing my train of thought because I'm looking up Daniel chapter 5 here for you. These things are taken, and then they show up again a little later in the book of Daniel, Daniel chapter 5. And if you go over there, this is the famous evening when Persia, the Persian Empire, the Medes and the Persians, actually invade the capital city, Babylon, without throwing a javelin or firing an arrow. And Herodotus records that the Median and Persian troops simply drained the Euphrates River, which ran through the city, walked under the wall after the water was drained, and came up in the middle of the city and surprised everybody. So what happens in chapter 5 is that King Belshazzar is making a great feast, invites a lot of people. They get drinking, having a good time, possibly bragging about past conquests. And then it says in verse 3 of chapter 5 of Daniel, they brought in, it is into the place where they were partying, they brought in the golden vessels that had been taken out of the temple, the house of God in Jerusalem, and the kings and the lords, his wives and his concubines, drank from them. They drank wine and praised the gods of gold and silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone. So they're desecrating these furnishings from the temple that were recovered here. And in verses 17 through 23, talks about all those treasures that are taken to Babylon that Belshazzar will later discredit or desecrate. And we see in verses 24 through 27, Judah's leadership is wound up and summarily executed before Nebuchadnezzar. Not an unusual situation in ancient warfare, and for that matter, even today, when a head of state starts a costly, sometimes ghastly war, law is brought to bear, and they are executed. So we have the Nuremberg trials at the end of World War II, for example. But this was just no trial here at all, just summarily rounded up all the leaders, government, civilian, and took them out to Riblah, a city just outside of Jerusalem, and had them executed before Nebuchadnezzar. Verses 28 through 30 then talk about the people who are taken into exile. So this is the actual exile of the people in 597. And then quite a bit of time lapses here. It talks in the 37th year of the exile. That King Jehoiachin is allowed to come out of prison. So here is some grace, I guess, from a pagan being extended to King Jehoiachin. He's taken out. He's allowed to sit at the king's table. He's given a regular allowance, so he has some independence. So he's treated much differently. There's been a change in monarchy here, a change from Nebuchadnezzar over to Medes and Persians, who had a slightly different policy than the Babylonians toward conquered people. So we see that happening here, and the book of Jeremiah ends on a kind of a note of hope. If this king could be restored in a pagan nation, perhaps God could restore his people to their land, is the question that raises in our mind. Tomorrow we'll be looking at the book of Lamentations, probably, as I said on the Sunday Connection, possibly the saddest book in the Old Testament. So we'll be in that book tomorrow. Until then, enjoy your short day and your short reading today. And I pray, brothers and sisters, that you continue in God's Word and that you are motivated and educated and edified by it, that the God of all comfort would comfort you through His Word. God bless you, brothers and sisters.